Hello and welcome back to the Fireside Lit Book Club, a quiet, candlelit corner of the internet where we read slowly, think deeply, and speak authentically about our experiences. I'm Lindsay, and I invite you to join me by the fire as we explore the soul of a book, the beauty it reveals, the questions it asks, and the ways it helps us understand life, identity, and meaning just a little more clearly. So we have Valentine's Day right around the corner, and thank God, because that means winter is progressing and we are halfway through the shortest month of the year. And I wanted to celebrate this holiday by recording an episode on love and romance in literature and also comparing it back to reality, because I think many of us are almost kind of brainwashed by books and the media into having one very narrow idea of what perfect love should look like, and it's just not realistic. There's this underlying message across much of what we consume that romantic love, at least, is always happy after some period of trial, that it is always perfectly reciprocal, and that a life spent with the right person is somehow going to lead to perfect fulfillment, which I'll go ahead and say it. That's a lie. It's a complete and utter lie, because even if you find the love of your life and you marry them or pledge your life to them, life isn't this like never-ending party or love fest. Like, you're going to encounter many obstacles. At times, you might feel like you can't stand your partner. You might go through periods of sickness, or they might. You're going to experience deaths together and perhaps births together, and lots of hurdles and variables in life that are ever changing. So because we live in the world, romantic love can't exist in a bubble, or at least it can't for long. Now, I realize, of course, how cynical this must sound of me, especially in a Valentine's themed episode, no less. I think, though, that the last time I really bought into that Hallmark vision of love was when I was a teenager, or I don't know, maybe even in college. From the time I was a preteen and young teenager, I'm talking like, I guess 12 or 13, I was obsessed with love. I was that kid. I read teen romance after teen romance. That was my preferred genre. I would almost go so far as to say that was like my gateway into becoming literary. Like, that was my starting point. And I don't know if it was the hormones. I don't know if I was just a very romantic soul. I guess I still am. But I could not get enough. Judy Blume, Beverly Cleary, Sarah Ackler, Jenny Han, and Suzanne Colasanti were some of my favorite authors, along with pretty much anything else I could get my hands on in the young adult section at my local bookstore. But I was also a lot younger, and I had a much lower bar for what constituted a good book at that time. I have since drifted away from my love of romance in books because, sadly, good romance novels, and I mean somewhat realistic romance novels, are actually quite hard to find because, surprise, surprise, I don't think they would sell particularly well to the masses. I mean, for me, they definitely would, but I think most people are more interested in the fantasy of love than the reality, and so that's what we get. That's what our bookstore shelves are filled with. As an example, I picked up a Danielle Steele book on a lark at the airport a few years ago, and oh my Lord. So, for starters, Danielle Steele is one of the top 5 earning authors in the world. You know, she just cranks out book after book, and it shows. Honestly, it shows. And I feel a bit bad saying that because I once read that her work ethic is kind of insane. I think this woman wears like a brace on her hand because of how many hours she spends typing. She sleeps, I think I read, like 4 hours a night, and she claims that's sufficient, but she gets out of bed and she immediately starts writing. So it's like, okay, I guess she's earned her place as one of the best-selling authors over the last several decades, but her work is just so trite, unrealistic. Dare I say cringe? I don't know. She's just one example. But all I can say is that having read a few of her books in the same vein as authors like James Patterson and Nicholas Sparks, these stories are just not real. These relationships do not reflect reality. Can we experience and encounter great love and joy within that great love? Absolutely. But again, life is not this never-ending love fest. Love shows up in the everyday, the hard, the gritty, the work that no one wants to do. But that's what's necessary for growth, maturity, and depth. Love inspires us and pushes us toward reaching our full potential because we want to serve the beloved. In fact, my husband asked me recently what I believe the point of life is, and there was really only one conceivable answer I could think of, which is to grow in perfect love. I think that's honestly the point of everything. Whether you are single your whole life and pour that love into creations or inventions or exploration, whether you're married with kids and pour it into another person or other people, whether you're in a religious order and pour it into God. I think when it comes down to it, when it's all said and done, the point of life is to love. And not only to love, but to love deeply and grow in what it means to truly love. Not in the sense of what you get out of it, but in how much of it you give. So, with all of that said, I wanted to spend some time discussing a few books I've read over the years that I feel encapsulate what it means to love well or what it means to experience relationships realistically. Because marriages and relationships often don't look like what they should, and that's another layer here. What is true and what people actually experience versus only the ideal. So without further ado, here is a list of 10 books I've read through the years that I feel paint an honest portrait of what not only love looks like, but marriage, infatuation, friendship, and familial love. We begin with one of my personal favorites, A Severe Mercy by Sheldon Vonnegut. And it's been a while since I've read this book. I have changed in many ways from the first time I cracked its spine years ago, but I think if I were to reread it today, I would still feel the same affinity for it and would still be equally moved by the love the two main characters have for each other and for God. This book is actually a memoir about the author's marriage and chronicles this couple's epic love story from their early years when the world was alive with possibilities and included adventures like sailing, traveling the world, and studying at Oxford University, as well as their later years, which include the maturation of their marriage and spiritual lives as they face unexpected challenges that will demand everything of them. And at the time when I read this, I had gotten out of a relationship that wasn't what I needed it to be in order to grow into my full potential and embrace everything I wanted to be. There were times I felt like I wasn't sure I had made the right decision because I was alone for many years after that breakup, and I wasn't sure that what I was looking for actually existed. But this book at the time gave me hope that great loves like this do exist, and it was a hope that sustained me until I eventually met and married my husband. This memoir reminded me that even though love is not a never-ending fairy tale, it can and should be epic in small ways. In its patience, its compassion, its conversations, its faith, and its mercy. So as you can see, I think very highly of this book. It does have a very Christian emphasis and leaning to it, but I truly think that anyone can relate to and appreciate the love story that Vonnegut recounts. This is also a great one for readers who love C.S. Lewis, as he becomes a close friend to the couple in the book after they meet him at Oxford, and this account really brings him to life as more than just the philosophical writer we all know through his published work. Next on the list is Quo Vadis by Erich Sienkiewicz. And this is a book I hold up side by side with A Severe Mercy because they have a lot of overlap and similarities, even though they were written during very different time periods. Quo Vadis has actually been my favorite book for the last decade or so because at the time I was in my senior year of college, and I remember thinking that I had never read a love story that was so authentic. It touched all the same places in my heart as the stereotypical romance novel, but its power and its conviction put it head and shoulders above any other romance I had ever read before, because the love was not egocentric, but based on something beyond. In this case, that something beyond was the couple's belief in Christianity and their faith during the time of the Roman persecution of Christians. As a result, the stakes are much higher here than they are in a typical, will they or won't they love story, because I do believe personally that love is strengthened and made perfect when ordered towards something beyond the self, and even something beyond the beloved. This is definitely one I will have to revisit very soon, because a decade, in my opinion, is far too long to continue to call this my favorite book without having reread it recently. But from everything I remember and the impressions this novel left me with, I would definitely recommend it for this Valentine's Day and beyond. Next, we have The Art of Loving by Erich Fromm, which is not a novel, but it's one of the most profound explorations of what it means to love and be loved that I have ever encountered in the written word. Erich Fromm was one of the most brilliant minds in psychology during the 20th century. He understood that love is a concept that goes far beyond our everyday understanding of it. It's not a fantasy, a romance, or an escape from reality, but an objective and productive engaging with reality, and a commitment to discipline and concentration within relationships. I was also quite captivated by Fromm's take on love and faith and religion, much of which made a great deal of sense to me. He draws captivating comparisons between religious attitudes and child-parent relationships, underscoring the differences between Western and Eastern spirituality and schools of thought as they pertain to their respective cultures. Fromm combines psychological, sociological, and philosophical perspectives to explore the essence of love, and he does it in a mere 180 pages. Ultimately, The Art of Loving is a quiet but radical reminder that love is not something we fall into or stumble upon, but something we must actively learn, practice, and choose again and again. This next one took me about 6 months to read, but makes the list for one of the most memorable books I've read to date, particularly when it comes to the author's detail and accuracy in describing relationships. Middlemarch by George Eliot consists of characters that were written to become living, breathing people, deserving of our sympathy, disgust, and admiration alike. By the end of the novel, we've followed and become thoroughly absorbed in the lives of myriad characters, but most of all, intimately acquainted with our heroine, Dorothea. The Middlemarch narrative was constructed artfully and lovingly around Dorothea, who espouses many admirable traits and undergoes significant trials throughout her young life. And one of these is her marriage. She is disillusioned by what her life could be like as the wife of Edward Casaubon, a middle-aged scholar who is 3 or 4 times her age, and discovers upon marrying him that it is not anything like what she envisioned. She finds herself the object of emotional and psychological abuse, with her husband frequently dismissing Dorothea's intellect, curiosity, and passion, and he seems to value only her docility, never her mind. He is also prone to cruel withdrawal as a form of punishment, and Dorothea ends up apologizing for things she hasn't even done wrong, internalizing guilt and confusion. Fortunately, in a twist of events that I won't get into too much, I don't want to include that many spoilers in case anyone is interested in reading the book for the first time, but Dorothea does eventually find the love she's always deserved. By the end of Middlemarch, we've accompanied her on a journey which has resulted in enormous character development and which has left her much altered. Dorothea is not the same woman she was at the start of her journey, and this is perhaps one of the most satisfying components of the novel. Ultimately, George Eliot excels in her ability to relay the daily monotony, joy, and challenges that marriage can entail. She puts words to the most minute of interactions and facial expressions that can absolutely wreck or repair a person's day, and expertly achieves these dynamics across the many marriages and relationships we encounter in the story. Eliot portrays love, fear, submission, disdain, resentment, and every other emotion under the rainbow to a degree that is actually unsettling because it is so accurate. In doing so, Middlemarch becomes less a novel about love in the abstract and more a mirror held up to the quiet, cumulative ways intimacy shapes and sometimes misshapes an entire life. Moving on to one of my favorite stories of all time, I'm tempted to say that Les Miserables by Victor Hugo is unmatched in its ability to portray the depth, courage, and sacrifice that authentic love requires, but I probably can't make that bold of a statement since I do feel somewhat similarly about other books on this list. Nevertheless, it is a book in which we experience all different kinds of love to their fullest extent. parental, fraternal, romantic, unrequited, and so on and so forth. The emotional range of each character is breathtaking and heartbreaking, but I would say that of all the characters we're introduced to throughout the novel, Jean Valjean is just the very embodiment of self-actualization, constantly acting from strong conviction, moral courage, and selfless love. I will, in fact, make this very strong statement. I truly believe there's no other character in literature who is as heroic, altruistic, and benevolent as the hero of Les Miserables. We follow him as silent witnesses through the events of his life, many of them so horrible that they should have caused him to fall into permanent despair or bitterness. But the growth Valjean experiences, his character arc, is so remarkable that it makes every other aspect of the story that much more of an emotional investment for readers. For the sole purpose of meeting Jean Valjean alone, I implore you to pick up Les Miserables. It looks daunting. It is I think the unabridged is 1,400 pages, but I promise you, you won't be sorry. And it's honestly a perfect read for Valentine season if you're interested in a love story that goes beyond mere romance and explores the multifaceted nature of love. The Optimist's Daughter by Eudora Welty is one of the few books I've ever read that so wonderfully, painfully, emotionally depicts the dynamics of a family. And not just all the good or all the bad, but the real-life account of what it was like for an only daughter to grow up with parents who loved her, whom she loved in return through it all. The main character, Laurel, revisits scenes from her past as she boxes up and burns all of the evidence that had ever happened at all after the death of her father. Her mother has already died years ago, and her stepmother, Faye, is to inherit Laurel's childhood home. Faye embodies the classic archetype of evil stepmother, and Laurel knows she must handle her parents' belongings before Faye can get to them and desecrate them. Of course, we as readers are taken along on Laurel's journey to the past, getting lost in her memories as vibrant vignettes of a person's ordinary life. What made the scenes particularly vibrant was that each and every one of them was colored with the undeniable tint of love. From the description of her mother's favorite hand-sewn blouse and her attachment to her beginnings, which she affectionately refers to as up home, to the way her parents read to one another at night as Laurel drifted to sleep, to Laurel's father's devotion to her mother even as she began to fail, there is little about this book that won't touch any given reader. If you've experienced love and loss in your life, these pages will resonate with you in a special way. So, I have conflicting feelings about this next one, but I did want to include it because I ultimately love the story, even if I struggled with the book itself. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen is one of the most classic romance novels to exist for a reason. These are characters who not only exhibit chemistry in spades, but also deal with very real challenges, personality flaws, and social hurdles that make their relationship rocky at first. Mr. Darcy, the love interest, is really easy to hate initially. He's just not a likable fella. And I will say, as lovable as Elizabeth Bennet can be, she certainly has her flaws as well. But I think that's why this story is so successful. This is not a couple we can easily picture together, but something draws them to each other despite their mutual loathing at the beginning of the novel. And both Darcy and Elizabeth grow tremendously as people by the time they realize they're in love. It's not the fluff romance of today's novels. It's a relationship that blossoms in spite of all the obstacles these two face along the way. As a personal note, this is actually not one of my favorite books. This might be sacrilegious to say, but I'll go ahead and say it. I actually immensely enjoyed the 2005 film adaptation with Keira Knightley far more than I enjoyed the book. The movie is actually pretty true to the novel. It's just that for me, the story really shines with this exact cast and production and really comes to life on the screen. I don't say this about many movies compared to books, but I definitely suggest giving this one a watch if you haven't already. Next, which may come as a bit of a surprise, but I would actually include the Harry Potter series on this list. I have always said that these books exemplify what it means to love fully, courageously, and sacrificially, from parental love to fraternal love, and even eventually to romantic love. Harry Potter is a story about the timeless battle, the existential battle of good versus evil, and how goodness and love will always win out against corruption and evil, though there is often much lost along the way. Real love requires sacrifice always, and in an age where it seems many of us have forgotten that, I would heartily recommend the Harry Potter series as the perfect example. Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy is often remembered for its tragedy, but on rereading it, what struck me most was how deeply it is a novel about love and about who society allows to be loved. Tess is not only beautiful, but profoundly selfless, compassionate, vulnerable, and strong. And Hardy's most painful irony is that she remains overwhelmingly pure despite the trauma inflicted on her early in the novel. That trauma, committed against her by a powerful man, becomes the stain Victorian society refuses to see past. Not because of any moral failing on Tess's part, but because of a rigid, image-obsessed culture that values appearances over humanity and holds women to impossible standards. And yet, within this brutal power imbalance, Tess still experiences real love and acceptance, love that sees her goodness, even if it ultimately falters under social pressure and idealization. Hardy uses that love to expose just how cruel a system can be when it worships purity while refusing compassion. Madonna in a Fur Coat is what I would call an outpouring of the human soul. Longing, yearning, infatuation, youth, passion, and everything in between, on paper. The main characters are immature, melodramatic, and easily overtaken by their emotions and whims, but I think that's precisely what makes them so relatable. They are utterly, unmistakably alive, searching for meaning in a cold, predictable world governed by labor, duty, and the mundane. Both have been disillusioned by the gap between reality and the bright inner lives of their minds, but by what life is versus what it could and should be. When they meet, it feels unmistakably like a meeting of soulmates. These are characters and a romance I would have found faultless had I read this book as a teenager, so I'm actually grateful I encountered it at this stage of my life, where I could experience their love as not only deeply beautiful and tragic, but also hopelessly flawed and at times fickle. And though it becomes clear that fickle behavior does not equate to fickle emotion, instead it grows from the painfully familiar belief that one is not good enough to deserve the kind of love one has always dreamed of, even when it is close enough to touch. I highly recommend this book to anyone who values the intensity, complexity, exuberance, and devastation of human emotion, especially as it appears in relationships and young love. So, all in all, if you were to ask me which books I would hold up as truly worthwhile explorations of love, I would use each and every one of these. Not because they offer perfect romances or tidy resolutions, but because they're honest. They show love as something that unfolds over time, shaped by sacrifice, power, fear, devotion, faith, misunderstanding, and growth. These are stories that resist fantasy in favor of truth, and in doing so, they honor love far more deeply than any idealized version ever could. If there's anything I hope you take away from this Valentine's Day episode, it's that real love, the kind that endures, is not found in perfection, but in the willingness to see, to stay, and to grow. As always, thanks so much for joining us at the Fireside Lit Book Club. We'll see you again very soon.